Hello there, I am Mont27p, the animator and director of Speedrun, here with the behind the scenes of my animation. Speedrun has been an animation I've been wanting to tell for a while. Being a fan of speedrunning, combining that with Dream and his manhunts made for an interesting animation. Speedrun was actually an animation that I wanted to make before Redstone Christmas, which was my previous animation I released on the channel. At this point I was still going through school and wanted to be able to work on something shorter and easier to release something before the end of the year, so I ended up pushing back Speedrun since it was a more ambitious project. Come the start of January, I got back to work on it though by doing some final story polish and starting the animation. The first month of production consisted of maps, assets, skins and doing layouts for the entire animation. In layouts, I had simple movements and camera shots to get the basics of timing and duration. In terms of maps, I did sadly end up using a variety of different seeds I randomly generated and selected to find the best sections of worlds I needed. The Nether in particular I was a little more picky on, as I wanted this long shot over the fortress as it's revealed in this open space. I also needed to make sure it had a crimson forest and a warped forest for when Dream was killing Enderman later on. I did end up using a few adjustments before using it, like extending the fortress out to the side and removing some of the ceiling, as it was still obstructing certain shots. But I think it worked out nicely. We even get to see all the biomes minus Soul Valley in this one single shot, which is cool. In terms of skin design for Dream, I found a good base skin online that probably would have worked in a cinematic animation, but I still felt it could have used some tidying, so I ended up getting in doing some of my own shading and touches like gloves and straps in an attempt to stay closer to a lot of the fan art made on Dream, particularly from Sadist's animations. A few different ideas were thrown around as to how I wanted to tell this story. I can leave the original scripts somewhere in the description if people want to read them. Originally though, it wasn't set in the Black Plasma universe. I had it originally start with the world generating in as Mont and Dream were spawned into the world to speedrun. Eventually it got turned into a competition in the BPS world, which also allowed for some nice Patreon appearances. The basic idea of the animation revolves around multiple speedrunners entering a competition to be the first to beat a single Minecraft world. Each speedrunner goes off on their own paths and has their own strategies for completing the game. This ends up resulting in the runners colliding paths more as the speedrunners progress, and it turns more into a manhunt as the final three start to face off. As the Ender Dragon threatens to defeat them all, Mont and Dream both get past their differences and team up, displaying the theme of teamwork which this animation revolves heavily around. Speedrun starts out in the end, which I actually labelled as Scene 0 as this was a late addition to the plot. We are introduced to the character Mont, who is established as a beginning speedrunner, once the camera pans back out into the real world. It's worth mentioning here that I did obviously not follow some pretty key Minecraft features for the sake of making an interesting animation. A dragon never lands on the ground in-game. However, for an animation I felt this was a nicer way to express movement and make it feel more threatening. I did keep some key features the same though, approaching from the opposite side of the player, then descending over the exit portal, which I tried to replicate the animation for. Lord 3009 ended up doing the base of the dragon effects, including the breath material and the particle system. I came in later and added a little more variety to the shapes to make it a little more fierce. One of the Dream manhunts are playing on my laptop here. This was the Three Hunters grand finale, which is a very notable one to me. When Mont tries to leave, we get a shot of the other BPS animators wondering what I'm doing. We get to see Echo Soldier, who's done a lot of reactions to BPS content here as well. But another thing to point out, the computer he is on is displaying the menu that's in Phil's texture pack he made, so nice little reference there as well. Also worth a mention that both Illumina and Koriway make appearances here, who are more acknowledged speedrunners in the community. We now get introduced to the other competitors in this world. One thing I tried to show throughout the animation was that there are multiple ways to speedrun and different ways to complete the same task. For example, I set Mont with the typical bartering strategy in 1.16 for collecting pearls. However, I stuck closer to Dream's 1.15 runs where he used looting to gather pearls from a looting book he gathered from the temple earlier. The same goes for the early scenes, here showing a montage of collecting different starter items in various ways. One main thing I did end up focusing a lot on was minimalising foot sliding. There are a few ways to do this and I tried a few things at different stages. In the cave scenes and the first fight in the end, I did some out of root animation by dragging around the pelvis. This allowed the feet to remain with the root, which I'd come back and animate later for the feet. But for most shots I still animated from the root, which would make the feet slide around all over the place. So I ended up going frame by frame and bringing the foot back. Tedious, but I think it worked out. When Dream goes to build the portal, I separated all these different lava pools and keyframed them to switch places when needed. The nether stuff was particularly interesting. The base lighting was managed by Lord for all the scenes, which he did a great job at. Some of the nether did however lack nice contrast and mood, in which I later came in to add my own touches. I incorporated things like ambience particles, more background lighting so I could get some more contrasted shadows, a variety of brighter areas, and played around a lot with the mist. The nether probably took the most work to light, being such an enclosed space. With none of us BPS animators ever touching the new nether stuff yet, there were a lot of new things to play with. Overworld scenes, normally I can get away with just rotating the sun lamp to get nice shadows, but the sun doesn't work here. On multiple occasions I've gone in and manually animated falling objects instead of using physics systems, as I feel I have a little more control over them. I may lose a bit of realism, however at this point I think I can do a pretty good job of them. A little luck later, and we get a blaze fight, which was a cool way to reveal the fortress, while not directly showing it just yet. I ended up being pretty creative with the blaze animations. I ended up creating this charge and fire animation whenever a blaze would shoot. The rods would start to spin quicker and start to contract, then explode outwards. Little trails would also follow the fireballs. Sticking close to the blazes in game, I had them light up before they would shoot. And eventually we get to see the reveal of the fortress, which the shot worked out quite nicely, I think. Here I ended up having nearly one continuous shot by having the camera try to follow the action. It probably became a little too disorientating for some people, but I think the idea worked. Lord did a bit of early work on the blazes firing, which I ended up reworking later. A few effects from Songs of War were reused, like this trail effect here. Once again, playing around a lot with the blaze rod animations when they die, I had each of them spin rapidly as each rod gets thrown and spun around before the blaze disappears. Most of the effects were done by Lord in this particular shot, but this is a cool way I feel to reveal the looting sword, which was possible by the book gained from the temple. 3 pearls drop after the Enderman had died. This again does stick close to Dream's 1.15 runs. The blowing up of the portal was a reference to Dream's 4-hunter rematch manhunt. I needed to find some way to have the portal get deactivated. I believe that manhunt got released while I was still early in production, and I was able to add that in. Only having a flint, Mont needed to get some iron to be able to craft a flinted steel. You can get iron nuggets from bartering, which is conveniently given first try. Now this is another point where I broke Minecraft logic, as they went through the same portal that they came through, yet arrived at a completely different place. I could have simply just used a different location in the nether instead of the same portal, but the current location worked nicely as I wanted a warped forest close by, where Endermen spawn frequently. Aside from a few camera cuts at the start and end, most of this scene was a continuous shot where the camera would follow the action. I really love these types of shots, particularly with action films. In fact, one of my favourite scenes from a movie is the continuous shot. But the thing about them is I can't take shortcuts if characters are on screen all the time. Normally between camera cuts, animators can jump between poses and positions to save time and be more convenient, but I couldn't do that here. I tried minimizing the amount of foot sliding by keyframing the foot frame by frame. I had to try and get creative with characters doing things on the run, while also keeping the camera alongside all this movement. The character routes were actually animated to follow this path, which ended up being very useful. I could just keyframe this value on a path constraint to tell it where on the path it should be, instead of animating the route. It's particularly at this point we also see everyone colliding paths and fighting each other, basically turning into a manhunt. Dream places a variety of blocks here to make Mont switch up his tools to get through, which gives Dream enough time to dig down. We get transitioned into the stronghold using a little tunnel, which is actually 2 separate maps. Main thing to mention in this scene is the portal. What I did here was again use separate parts of maps and combine them into one. I cut out the stronghold room and rotated it onto the edge of the end. I lit the stronghold using these point lights further back in the room to avoid light seeping through into the end. Outside the camera there's a few map pieces moving everywhere. Everything was able to be hidden once the camera cuts though. I did have a different effect in mind earlier on, where you could only see the stronghold from the room through the open portal when standing in the end, but I wasn't able to get around to that sadly. So you can still see the top of the stronghold like here. Getting into the first of the end fights, we have Mont vs Lone Wolf, not Bad Boy Halo, as some people got confused. They both appear later. This fight is used to lure people into feeling like the dragon is not a threat. A lot of this fight is very axe and shield PvP oriented. The shield here gets disabled multiple times, like what happens in game. Now the real fight begins as the dragon now threatens. This is where I started to have real fun, as dragons are honestly really cool despite being so tedious. Although some of the earlier shots were very annoying to animate, as trying to keep up with a flying dragon always moving in a scene makes it hard to keep track of all these small details. I ended up taking the dragon rig used in Songs of War and made a few adjustments, particularly to the tail. I was finding it rather annoying to animate and offset. I ended up creating a spline IK constraint where I could use anchor points to control where a section of the tail would go. This allowed me to get a little more specific with the flicking of the tail, while also animating and keeping track of less bones. It was also in the scene where I started to use a lot of constraints. When the dragon goes to pick up Mont, there's these little hidden cubes on Mont's arms, which the feet start to snap to once the dragon grabs hold. This helps stop all the sliding and frame by frame keyframing. There are a lot of these hidden objects which do different things. I had one help control the rotation of an axe, to have it stay rotated with the shield. I had these anchor points to help guide the wings on the ground. I also took a bit of a different approach to doing IK animation, while still being able to keep the body level and do root animation. Animating such a large creature allowed me to have some very dramatic moments and really try and emphasize impacts. I wanted the dragon to feel menacing and looming over them. This shot here was also a little inspired by a few shots in Godzilla vs Kong, without giving spoilers. Near the end of the fight, as the dragon gets more damage, it starts to get worried, but gives one final charge which results in its downfall. Also I note that arrows don't actually destroy beds. Having someone shoot and someone place a block to shield the explosion seemed like a cooler idea. Teamwork. The speedrun now being complete, we're brought back to the real world. Dream and Mont are both awarded with the trophy and they part their own ways. In an earlier version of the script, I had Dream remove his mask to try and show he was human. That ended up being removed to not come across the wrong way since he doesn't have a face reveal. Technically speaking, a speedrunning competition would not be run like this or have multiple winners, but for the sake of an animation and storytelling, we have both of them winning. The few runners we see weren't the only people to speedrun. Illumina, who was shown as a runner, also played, but it can be inferred he was on a different world or server. Doesn't necessarily mean he lost his run either, just maybe slower. That brought to a close the main animation. Then it was on to bloopers and thumbnails, going through reactions and wrapping everything up. Just as some final notes, Speedrun was a great animation to work on. The dragon was probably my favourite part to animate, and I was excited to try a whole heap of new things like larger fights, the new nether, end lighting, and just a project of this scale. I also tried a few different stylistic things like a smooth mouth and teeth, which will be interesting to see how people receive that. It still had ups and downs like most projects, but I'm happy with the end product, although I'll still be looking to see where I can improve. I'll try and give out certain assets that were used in production, but I won't list anything right now as I'm not entirely sure what I'm able to give, so check the description below for any links if people are interested. I hope everyone enjoyed the animation and are excited for more projects. That concludes everything for now, so I shall depart. Bye everyone.